Start. Okay, so guys, we're going to be looking at Tom Crean in this morning's listening class. Okay, so Tom Crean is someone from Kerry. Here's another picture of him. What do you think his job was when you see the photographs? Well, Tom Crean was an explorer. You can see him here in this picture with some of the husky puppies. Huskies are dogs that were used to carry the sleds when he was exploring. So, explorers are people who go where no one has gone before. So, at the beginning of the 20th century, there were very few places on the earth where human beings hadn't yet explored. One place that was, guys, can I just ask you to turn off your microphone there? Just okay, great. So one place that was yet unexplored was the North and South Pole, so the Arctic and the Antarctic. These two places now became the target of explorers. However, it was still a huge challenge to get there due to the temperatures and the landscape as well, because it's extremely mountainous. So Tom Crean went on an exploratory trip to the Antarctic South Pole. And here he is taken as part of the photograph of the crew of explorers that went to the South Pole um, in the beginning of the 20th century. Okay, so you see him there in the bottom right hand corner. So Tom Crean, he was born in a place called Awananshgoil or Abascull in West Kerry in 1877. His parents had a small farm in the mountains in Kerry. Actually, they were in the mountains in the Dingle Peninsula, and they were sheep farmers. He had five brothers and four sisters, so he had a very big family. Tom went to school in a place called Bracklonach, near to Awananshgoil. But he had to leave school at 12 years of age in order to work on the farm and help his parents. In 1893, Tom decided to leave the village and go and join the Navy. So he went to join the British Navy when he was just 15. So this is here on this slide, you can see where the Dingle Peninsula is and where Cork is. So uh, Aunashkyle is right next to Dingle, that you can see in the photograph, right? So if you just go from Dingle, if you just follow the main road out, so it's that was the place where he was born, and then he worked in the farm just in the mountains to the north of Aunaskull, right? So it's called Anaskull uh, in English. So the first journey that he made to the South Pole was an expedition that lasted from 1901 to 1904. You can see the ship here in the photograph. That was the ship that they went on, that they traveled there on. So in the year 1901, Tom Crean went to New Zealand with the Navy. When another boat pulled up alongside the boat from the Navy, This other boat was called the Discovery, right? That pulled up beside the one that Tom was on. There was an English explorer on the boat by the name of Robert Scott, and he was on the way to the Antarctic on board this ship, and the ship is called the Discovery. So there was one member of the crew of Scott's vessel, right? So crew, CREW, are the people who work on a ship. So there's one member of Scott's crew who had just left uh, the Discovery due to illness, and he was going to stay in New Zealand. So they were looking for another person, another man to go in his place. So Tom said he would be interested in traveling with Scott to the Antarctic, and he was accepted as a member of the crew of the Discovery. So the Discovery was primarily a sailing ship, sailing boat, but it had an engine as well, and the engine ran on coal. So the ship was filled with coal and food, and especially canned food for this long journey. So when they arrived in the Antarctic, they built a wooden cabin on a piece of rocky headland on a place called Ross Island. So Hut Point was the name that they had for this place, and that's the name of the place where they landed still today and where they set up camp. It's from this headland. So headland is a piece of coast which projects out into the sea. So it's from this headland that the group went out finding information about the environment of the Antarctic and about its wildlife. Remember, these were the first ever human beings to explore there. So here you can see a picture of them. When they were exploring, they would have to drag their supplies, all of their food, and all of the things that they needed along with them. On the second journey, they brought some husky dogs with them to help them carry the sled of equipment. So, sled, SLEDGH, is the sort of thing that slides on the snow. So, the ice froze around the ship during the winter of 1902. And unfortunately, the crew that was there with Scott didn't manage to get it free from the ice. So imagine that the ship is, it's moored or anchored in the water, but then in the winter it gets colder and the ice starts to form around the ship, and then the ice eventually, gets completely hard and it stops the ship from leaving. So they didn't manage to get it free from the ice until 1904. So it was frozen for the whole of 1903. So they had to drag the equipment and food from the ship over the ice in the snow sled, like you can see in the photograph. There was about 360 kilograms of equipment on each sled, and the work was extremely difficult for the crew, to drag this very, very heavy load with them. Here's a picture of the ship, when it gets sort of ice forming around it. And it can be very dangerous because it can break the wood of the ship. Remember, these ships were made primarily of wood at the time. So it can break the wood and it can mean that, that the boat sinks. So Robert Scott was, the leader, as I was saying earlier, of this first journey to the Antarctic. And he became very famous as a result of his explorations on this ship. And he began to be called Scott of the Antarctic. Scott's crew traveled closer to the South Pole than anybody else had done before. They ended up being about 760 kilometers from the South Pole, and it was an amazing new achievement for the time. It was a new world record. So it was the closest that any human being had ever got to the South Pole. Um, the Polar Medal was presented to Tom Crean and everybody else on the crew of the Discovery due to the efforts they had made and their achievements during this trip. Okay, so afterwards, I'm going to give you this presentation and you can watch some videos about the trip. Now, the videos are in Irish but with English subtitles. So, Tom then went on a second trip from 1910 to 1913. So Robert Scott decided to go on another trip to the Antarctic on a ship called the Terra Nova in the year 1910. So here's a picture of the ship that you can see in the slide. The aim that he had this time was to get to the South Pole itself. So remember, he had been 760 kilometers away from the South Pole. That was the closest that any human being had got to it. But now he wanted to go all the way there, right? So he was able to learn from the first trip and from some of the mistakes that they made. And this time they brought huskies, as I said, and they had learned ways of surviving and, um, ways of keeping warm and ways of using their food supply most effectively so that they could manage to get to the South Pole. But there were other teams trying to get to the South Pole as well. So there was a team from Ireland, but there was also a team from Norway, and there was a team from Russia and from a few other countries. So this part is in Irish, but let me translate it for you. This part I didn't get around to translating last night. So when they arrived in the Antarctic, Scott chose 15 men to go on a journey with him to the South Pole. So the other men would stay in the main camp near to the ship. Tom Crean was one of these men that Scott had chosen. So the group left the main camp in a place called Evans Headland on the island in the end of October 1911. Yeah, so is it Elon Ross? So yeah, so they left from Ross Island on that date. So when they were going on this second journey on the Terra Nova ship, so some of the equipment was destroyed, right, and this delayed them severely. Scott understood that the crew didn't have enough food for all of them to complete the journey. Now, in this picture that you can see, uh, the huskies are no longer there, right? The dogs that they had brought with them on the ship on the Terra Nova to help them carry the equipment on their journey, they had all been used as food at this stage. So this is, after many, many months of the journey having been made. So this is only half of the team because the team had to split up. So Scott understood that the crew didn't have enough food for all of them to complete the journey. They didn't expect to be there so long as well. They didn't expect to be there until 1914. So some of the people on the crew would have to go back to the main camp, and others would continue on to the South Pole. So 8 people were in the group when they managed to get to about 240 kilometers from the South Pole. So this was the closest that anybody had got up to that point. Remember, Scott on his previous journey, he had got up to 760 kilometers from the South Pole. Then Scott ordered Tom and 2 other explorers, 2 other people, Teddy Evans and Bill Lashley, to go back to the main camp. Remember, as I was saying, they didn't have enough food for everybody with them for all of them to go to the South Pole. So he had to send half of the crew back. So Scott himself carried on with four others towards the South Pole, and they brought a camera with them. So these pictures that you're seeing, like, are pictures that they took while they were there. So Tom Crean on the second journey again. The other two people, along with Tom Crean, they headed back to the main camp. Now, can you imagine, right, that the main camp was 1,000 kilometers away from them? Okay, so they had to walk for 1,000 kilometers. Remember, all of the huskies, right, they had killed and eaten food at this stage. So they were only walking at this point. And imagine having to walk all of that distance with very little food. So they had a disastrous experience on the way back. Uh, they didn't have a compass to help them find a way back. They only had one compass, and Scott, the leader of the exploration, he had kept the compass. And the weather was getting colder and the winter was on its way. So when people would go and try and make this trip to the South Pole, they would go in during the summer of the Antarctic, so in the southern hemisphere summer. So that would be in, December, January. So it was beginning, to get to March at this stage. Okay, so they'd been walking for months and months and months. So the waters started getting colder, it started getting very stormy and windy. Remember that the land isn't flat as well in the Antarctic. It's very mountainous, so they had to climb up over mountains, and they're dragging all their equipment as well. At the beginning of the journey, remember, they had the husky dogs to help them take the equipment, but at this stage, they didn't have that help. Um, so on the way back, they got lost. And Evans, one of the group of the three people, so there was Evans and there was the other explorer, what was his name? Bill Lashley. So Teddy Evans and Bill Lashley. Uh, so Teddy Evans got sick, and they had to put him on the snow sled, and they had to drag him as well because he was too sick to help to drag the sled with them. When they got 65 kilometers from the main camp, all of the food was gone at this stage, and they were still too weak to drag the snow sled anymore. So Tom Crean said that he would walk back alone and get help. So he had to walk back all of the 65 kilometers without any food, or he had very, very little food. I think he had three biscuits and one piece of chocolate. Um, and he couldn't sleep, right? So he was going to walk for 3 days straight, right? So for 72 hours straight, approximately, to get back to the camp. Remember, they're walking in very thick snow and wind at this stage, so the rate that they can walk is very slow. So Lashley, the other explorer, would stay and look after Evans, who was the one who was sick, remember, until Tom managed to get help from the main camp. So Tom was in a terrible state at this stage. He was absolutely freezing and totally exhausted after driving the heavy snow sled full of supplies for over 2,000 kilometers now at this stage, every day since the beginning, nearly 6 months before. So it took him 3 months to get there. It took him, well, about 2 months to get there because they had the dogs that helped them get there, but 4 months to get back. And all he had left to eat to walk this 56 kilometers was three biscuits and a bar of chocolate. Remember, he couldn't sleep because Evans was dying and they needed to get help as soon as possible for him. Evans, by the way, he was sick. He was so sick because he didn't have enough vitamin C, so he got a disease called scurvy, Scurvy. So it's a disease where you start to bleed in your gums and your teeth start to fall out, and eventually you will start bleeding inside your body as well, and you'll eventually die from loss of blood. So it took him, as I was saying, not 18 hours, 72 hours to walk back to the main camp to do those 56 kilometers. So when he got back to the camp, amazingly, right? Remember, he didn't have any compass or a map, but he found the main camp in complete white snow of the coming winter, right in the Antarctic. And then he told the people, the other explorers that were in the main camp, about Evans and the other crew member who had who were stuck out in the snow and needed to be rescued. And then he immediately collapsed on the floor after his incredible journey. So there was a team then sent out to rescue the other explorers. Uh, Evans survived and made a full recovery. Right, that should be, instead of awfully, it should be a full recovery. So he was given an Albert Medal for bravery, and also the other crew member, Bill Lashley, the one who had stayed with Evans, the sick person. Um, yeah, they both got a medal, and this medal is given for saving someone's life. So when I give you the presentation, you can look and you can see the second part of the documentary. So this gives you an idea of the 2,000-kilometer journey that they had to make from the sea, right, all the way through this very, very mountainous landscape after a while. So, like the first kind of part of the journey, the first 1,000 kilometers, the land is relatively flat, although it's quite hilly. But then you go through huge mountains that you can see there in the middle, and then you have to continue on to the South Pole. And remember, there's no help whatsoever. There's nobody living on this island or anything like that. So, and remember, it took him like 6 months journey to go from the main camp to getting to the South Pole and back. So anyway, Scott and the four other people. Remember, Tom Crean went back before he had got to the South Pole. But Scott and four other people managed to get to the South Pole on the 17th of January, 1912. They didn't win the race, however, to get to the South Pole first, because an explorer from Norway by the name of Ronald Amundsen got to the South Pole 1 month before. So he got there in December of 1912. So Scott and the four other men, unfortunately, that you can see in the picture, well, Scott is in the picture. He died from the cold and from hunger on their way back. So Scott never managed to make it back at all. Yeah, did somebody have a question there?
Yeah, I didn't see any another picture.
Okay, maybe I can go back one and go forward again. So I'm going back, and now I'm on slide 16. Can you see it?
No,
No?
14.
Oh, it's still 14, is it? All right. Guys, has anybody else the same problem?
No, I'm
Uh,
okay.
okay. What I'll do is I'll just pause the recording. Actually, I won't pause the recording. I'll send you a copy of the presentation. Okay, so you can follow it. So just bear with me there for one moment, please. Okay, so guys, here's a copy of the presentation. So if it's not on the right slide, you, for example, now you can open up that. Now you need to open it using your UCC account. Okay, but so we're now on slide what is it? Slide 16 now. So if it's not moving for you onto the right slide,
Okay.
then you can just follow it yourself manually. Okay. Okay. So we're on slide 16. Okay. So Scott and the four other men, right? So they managed to get to the South Pole, but unfortunately, when they were on the way back to the main camp with everybody else, they died of the cold and hunger. They'd run out of food at this stage, and that's the picture of some of them uh, when they were when they're in the South Pole. You can see that they don't look very happy, you know, because they're absolutely starving, and also the clothing that people were wearing, it was fairly limited in terms of how warm it could keep you back in those days. We have modern explorers to the South Pole have better clothing, which completely traps the warm air inside their bodies and keeps the cold out. But their accounts of what happened, so they're keeping a diary, and also they had a camera. So the camera that they used to take this photograph, you can see the British flag in the back. So Tom Crean obviously was from Ireland, but Ireland was part of the United Kingdom at this stage. Um, so it was Britain that was whose flag was placed on the South Pole when they got there, and this camera was recovered by other members of the crew on another journey, and they managed to get the photographs, and they were published in newspapers and things like that, so people were able to see the journey, even though the people um, in this photograph, they all died on the way back, unfortunately. So again, when you get the presentation, you can click on the next part of the documentary about Tom Crean. Okay, so we're on slide number 17 now, Noah. Okay, so this gives you another idea of what the journey was like. Okay, so it's about 2,300 kilometers or so. So you can see that Admundsen from Norway, he landed and he had his base camp in the Bay of Wales, and he was able to go via the Axel Heiberg Glacier, and he was able to get to the South Pole in December. And then Scott and Crean and the other expedition, they had their main base in Ross Island, and they got there on the 17th of January, and they went via the Beardmore Glacier. So one of the members of the crew, Evans, he died on the 17th of February 1912 on the way back, and then Oates died. So he was another member of the crew. He died on the 17th of March. And then approximately, we don't know exactly, but Scott, Wilson, and Bowers, uh, the other explorers, they all died sometime around the 3rd of uh, March, or the 30th of March 1912. But uh, on a following journey, they managed to find their supplies, and they found the photographs and the diary. Um, okay, so we're on slide number 18 now, Noah. So anyway, Tom made a third attempt, and probably the third attempt is the most famous one, right? Is even more incredible than the one that we've just seen there. So Tom went back to the Antarctic along with the Irish explorer Ernest Shackleton in the year 1914. So because they had lost the race to the South Pole itself, they decided to do another journey, and this journey was going to be to walk from one side of the Antarctic to the other via the South Pole. Right, so this was going to be a total of 2,800 kilometers. So this is going to be the longest journey ever attempted. They traveled to the Antarctic, this time on a ship called the Endurance. Here is the ship that you can see in the photograph. Now we're on slide number 19 now. Uh, the third attempt again, right? We're on. So you can see a picture of the ship here, right, where they landed. So they landed, near to Ross Island again. On their way towards the Atlantic, right, when they were approaching the Antarctic, unfortunately, their ship got stuck in ice, right? So when you're going in this area, right, even in the summer, there's lots of ice, and the ice can be melting and then it freezes very quickly. Um, so there's normally ice floating around, and unfortunately, the ship got stuck in the ice. Right now, they're not on land at this stage. Okay, so when you see them on the picture, right, where you can see a man standing and he's trying to break up the ice. So they're not on land there; they're on ice. Right, they're on a glacier, a moving glacier. Okay, so they're nowhere near land there. They're in the ocean. So unfortunately, though, in spite of their efforts that you can see in the picture there, they didn't manage to get the ship free from the ice, and the ship got completely stuck. Okay, now they're in the middle of the ocean now. Okay, and their journey to the Antarctic now is like, they have to change their plans of going from one coast to the other. Their mission now is to just stay alive. So the crew spent 10 months stuck on the Endurance while they were being taken by the current of the sea. Okay, so the sea current was just moving them. They didn't have any control over it. And they were kind of living on this floating glacier of ice in the sea. Slowly, the ice started to break the ship apart. Remember that the ship is made of wood. In the end, the ship broke up completely and it sunk, leaving the whole crew stuck on this glacier, so stuck on the ice in the middle of the ocean. Now, they had no idea where they were, and they were unable to communicate with the outside world. There was no radio or anything like that at this stage. Radio hadn't been invented yet. So here's a photograph that they actually took of the ship, the Endurance, right, as it's sinking. So this was an actual photograph that they took after they got. They tried to take all of the useful equipment, and there was also one small lifeboat made from wood that they managed to take with them too. So if you just look here, right? So basically, right, the lifeboat, they had to drag the lifeboat across this glacier to try to get to the sea, right? So they could try to get home. At least part of the crew were going to go and try to get help, and the other crew were going to stay on the glacier. Okay, so they had to drag the boat. Now, when they started trying to drag this lifeboat at the beginning, they could only drag it like about 100 meters in one day, and they had to go about 70 meters in order to get to the edge of the glacier. Right, so it was, and they didn't have any camp at this stage, so they were under severe pressure to stay alive. Okay, so they had to drag the lifeboat to sea, which they had managed to salvage from the Endurance. So the word salvage, Salvage, means things that you are able to save from something that is sinking or a house that's been destroyed. So it's things that you manage to save, not people. With people, it would be rescue. So this is slide 21, by the way. Now, if you're managing to keep up with us, can you see the right slide now? Can you
Yes.
see slide 21?
Yeah, I see in my phone.
Oh, perfect, perfect. Okay, okay, that's great. So um, the boat, as I was saying, was extremely heavy. Also, remember they had all their equipment, all their food, and things like that, all their supplies. Anyway, they managed to get to a place called Elephant Island on the 15th of April, 1916. Now, um, there wasn't enough room for all of the crew on the ship. You can see that there were only seven members of crew that were able to fit on the lifeboat. So seven members of the crew took the lifeboat and they went to get help, and the other people had to remain on the glacier in the middle of the ocean. So anyway, the group of seven, they managed to get to Elephant Island on the 15th of April 1916. Now, the winter has well and truly started in the Antarctic at this stage in April, right? So it's coming into the summer in the northern hemisphere. So it's extremely cold, and it's extreme. The seas are extremely rough that time of the year. So imagine going in a little boat like that in a very, very rough ocean. There was no shelter at all on this island that they got on, Elephant Island, and there was no one living there at all at this stage. And most of the men, the seven men, were getting very weak and very sick at this stage. So they knew that their only hope was to get to a place, a small island called St. George's Island, which was about 1,300 kilometers to the northeast. So there was a Chilean whaling station on South Georgia Island. I'll show you where it is in a moment. So they knew that that was the place that they had to get to, and they could call for help in that place. So anyway, Shackleton and the five other men, I think that should be six other men, right? One, two, three, four, five, six. Yeah, six other men began their journey in the lifeboat. So the lifeboat is called the James Caird, which the lifeboat goes on to become very famous. Tom is one of the men in this group as well. So it took them 7 days to make the journey in the worst weather that you can possibly imagine and the worst seas that you can imagine. So this will give you an idea of how long the journey is, right? So you can see the dotted red line, right? This is where they drag the boat from. Now they can't go the other direction because it's all kind of little islands and stuff like that. And there was no way that they couldn't bring all of their equipment, all of their food on the boat with them. They had to leave the majority of that behind. Um, so yeah, they dragged the boat all of that journey, and then some of them stayed behind. So you can see the timeline, right? The 18th of January, 1915, the Endurance gets trapped in the ice. Then the Endurance is kind of floating along in on a glacier, on a large glacier in the middle of that ice, in the middle of the ocean. Um, but in on the 27th of October 1915, the Endurance is crushed and it sinks. So on the 30th of October 1915, they start their march, right, dragging all their supplies and dragging the lifeboat. Um, and yeah, sorry, 21st of November, the Endurance sank, so it was just crushed on the 27th. Then on the 21st of December 1915, they establish another camp, right? So this is where the people stay behind. And then on April 9th, 1916, they launch boats for Elephant Island, right? So that's that small little island that you can see just off the peninsula there, near to Ross Island. And and then they make landfall on Elephant Island on the 15th of April 1916. Then on the 24th of April, uh, they they leave on on the James Cairn to go to South Georgia, and then they arrive in South Georgia Island on the 19th of May. And when they arrive in St. George's Island, they actually arrive, as you can see in the picture, they arrive on the other side of the island from the Chilean whaling station or fishing station. So uh, Tom Crean does a really heroic thing to walk again for 48 hours non-stop without sleep over mountains and glaciers and things like that to get to the other side of George Island where they can get help. Okay, so and you can imagine the seas as well. You know, like this is an artist's depiction, but this is how high the waves would have been at times in the winter in the Antarctic. The sea is extremely rough, so the waves will be towering over their ship. So let me make sure that I finished everything on this slide. Okay, so yeah, they were very, very sick and very, very weak at this stage. Okay, I think we've covered everything there. So we're now on slide 25. So they finally managed to make it to South George's Island. However, they ended up on the wrong side of the island and they had to walk for 36 hours non-stop without sleeping. Now, some people were very sick at this stage. So it was only Tom Crean along with one other explorer who managed to walk all over these mountains on his own to get to the other side, to the Chilean whaling station. He had no food, he couldn't sleep, he knew that he had to go as fast as possible because um, his other crew members, his colleagues, were sick and they were in need of help. Um, Across these mountains, and there's a story as well where he goes up one mountain and he realizes that that mountain is taking him in the wrong direction, so he has to go down and climb up another one. So it's an amazing journey that he did, and he's climbing at night as well, traveling night and day for 36 hours non-stop until they get to this whaling station. So the whaling station or fishing station is Chilean, and as I was saying before, they knew they could get some help there. Incredibly, he made it, and every single member of the crew of the Endurance, right, even though the ship had sunk in the middle of the ocean in an ice pack, they had all survived in spite of all the obstacles that they had to overcome. Every member of the crew survived that third journey. So this journey became one of the most famous. So you can see a documentary. Remember, the documentary is in Irish, but it has English subtitles on it there on YouTube. So Tom Crean back in Ireland. Here's a picture of him with his family when he is a little bit older. So Tom went back into the Navy again when he got home. He got married in 1917. He left the Navy in 1920, and he and his wife Nell, who you can see in the photograph, they opened a pub in Kerry, right? So Kerry, just to the west of Cork, in the little village where he grew up. So the South Pole Inn is the name of the pub, and it's still there today. It's still on the main street in Aunascoil in West Kerry on the Dingle Peninsula. So maybe when the lockdown ends, you can visit Kerry, visit Dingle. There's lots of things to see and do there, and you can also go in to the pub and take some pictures there. Maybe have some lunch there. They have nice food there as well. So it's still being run by his ancestors. I think his uh, great grandson is running it, or great grandson maybe. So let's finish up with Tom Crean's death and his legacy. So Tom Crean died in 1938. He was buried in a graveyard in a little place called Ballynacourta in the Kerry Mountains, in a tomb that he built himself. So a tomb, TOMB, the B is silent. So that's a place where you bury yourself. So he built the tomb himself, um, and his bravery um, in exploring the Antarctic and his amazing journeys back those two different explorations left its mark on the history of the Antarctic, because there is a mountain on the Antarctic called Mount Tom Crean, and there's also a glacial river called the River Crean in South George's Island as well. That should be Crean, Crean. Both of these were named after him in honor of him and his achievements. So, guys, I'm going to give you a minute there, right? So I'm going to stop talking now, right? I want you to go into breakout rooms. Okay, so well, Tom, Tommy, you're not here, right? You have to sort out your visa. Is that right? I think Tommy's got to sort out his visa. So, Hannah, Nawa, and Mohammed, can you talk together? I'm not going to listen. I'm going to go on hold for a couple of minutes. And can you explain to each other three things that you learned about Tom Crean and what else you understood about the story? You can use the slides to help you if you want. So I'll give you about 5 minutes to do that. Also, I've got one other task for you to do, which I'll put a picture of this actually in the recording too, is to try to figure out the dates for these things in, yeah, no problem, Tommy. Um, try to find out the dates for these various events in Tom Crean's life and match them to the dates that they happened. Okay.
Okay.
So yeah, I'll put that picture there in here. Okay, so guys, between the three of you, you've got a couple of things that you need to do. First of all, you have to mention three things that you learned about Tom Crean to one another. Okay, and then write them in the chat. Okay, so I'll need you to compile those together and write them for me. And then if you assemble or do the exercise on when things in Tom's life happened, okay, and yeah, so we'll check the answers to that in a moment. Okay, so I'm going to go on hold so you're not worrying about me listening to you. Okay, and I'll give you about 5 minutes or so to do that. Okay, guys.
Okay.
Perfect. Okay.
Okay.
So I'm just going to turn off the recording there.